I am Lisa Michelle Tatum. I am the former president of the State Bar of Texas, and I have my own law practice, LM Tatum PLLC, here in San Antonio, Texas. I am a child of educators. My father was in the military, so I'm an Air Force brat. My mother was an English teacher. So I had the structure academically, but didn't have a specific path where I wanted to be. I think probably like most kids. But by the time I was a sophomore going rising junior in college, I was home for the winter recess. My mom came in and said, you've been kind of down on yourself. What's wrong? And I said, I think I want to go to law school. She said, well, why are you crying? It's going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of time. And she laughed at me. And I just looked at her dumbfounded. And she said, sweetheart, I've always known you're going to be a lawyer. But I didn't want to pick your path or pick your direction. What do you want to do? And that's literally when I started looking into what would come next for me, since it was clear that I was not going to go to graduate school for something I didn't know I wanted to do. At that point, my father got involved. And he knew the current district attorney through some board service work that he had done. And so I spent a summer as a summer clerk, a free summer clerk at the Bexar County District Attorney's Office. And so with the summer internship with now sitting on the Court of Criminal Appeals, Judge Burt Richardson, and a gentleman by the name of Pat Hancock, I got full exposure to what life was like as a prosecutor and decided I did want to go to law school. I fell in love with litigation because while I was in law school, I took advantage of every opportunity. So I was in mock trial, I was in moot court, and I was in the law clinic. And I did not forget what I had learned and what I had seen working with Burt and Pat. So I applied to the district attorney's office. I felt that that was the wonderful place for me to start my career. Didn't know if I would end it there, but having that opportunity to be in the courtroom and try cases was what I'd been grooming myself for through trial team. My first most memorable case was actually a DWI. I was going against a seasoned attorney who had been known to just prevail and prevail and prevail. And I remember I needed something to get my jury that I wasn't sure I had fully in my hands at closing argument. And so the case involved a red car. So I took a piece of butcher paper and I drew out a red car. And then I cut it into pieces for the number of elements I had to prove in my case. And so when I walked through closing argument, I would put a piece of tape and put the piece on the wall until I finished closing argument and I had the image of a silhouette behind the wheel of this red car. And I could tell when I finished that unsure jury, I had them. It's about the art of persuasion. It's about credibility. It's about the ability to convey information, but we don't actually convey it. As the attorney, we have to elicit it. So it's really about how you get your witness to work with you. I'd say the second and probably the most outstanding case for me was a case that I never got to try. And it was a case that resulted in an interview with Texas Monthly, where I was working intake. And something about the case just did not sit well for me. So I kept going back to the lead detective, asking questions. And at one point when we were getting ready to present to grand jury, I had the defendant's mother actually reach out to me directly at the DA's office, which doesn't happen. So I made contact with her and I took the call. And some things that she said just did not sit right and indicated that there may be somebody else that was involved in the shooting. And went back to the detective again, gave him the name of the individual that I had been provided with to find out whether or not we had all the information. And sure enough, in talking to that individual again, someone else had been there, but had been removed from their story. And by the time we got done, it turns out that the defendant we were about to charge was the brother of the actual gentleman who committed the murder. and the brother who did not commit the crime did not have to do time for murder. I know that our system's not perfect, and that there are many times when we may have the wrong person, and we need to be cognizant of that fact, and nobody should sit in jail who shouldn't be there. So as a young prosecutor, gender was more prevalent in the courtroom. There weren't as many of us. Our numbers were growing as women attorneys, but comments would always be said about your attire. Oh my gosh. My first year, I can't tell you how many times I was called sweetheart, sweet cheeks, young lady. On race, it happened even before I got into the district attorney's office. While I was a law clerk, I helped an attorney try a case in Mississippi. That was also territory that my family, my mother in particular, had warned me about, but got called a nigger in front of the federal judge in the middle of jury selection. And that individual did not get called out for their behavior by the court. It got called out by my attorney that I was working with, who was also an African-American female, to which he continued to call her that name, and she had her own exchange with him that created a little kerfuffle. But yeah, it happens a lot. So resources usually create our opportunities. So there are young people who are all around who may feel pretty voiceless, and it may be because they don't have an avenue, don't have a resource, or have been discounted for the lack of resources. So I would say when we've got parents that are engaged, regardless of how much money that you have, regardless of what walk of life you lead, if they're engaged and they're loving, even if they're scared out of their mind, which is what my parents have been on many occasions in my life journey too, because they want to protect you, you will feel emboldened with a self-confidence and a self-awareness to speak that truth and to share difficult thoughts, have difficult conversations, and share positives. I think if you don't have someone in your corner, whether it's a parent or a guardian, friend, caregiver, it makes it a little bit harder. But there are young people who will stand up and have a voice in the midst of not having anyone. So I think that there's part of that is probably really a calling. There's something inside, an innate part of a spirit that tells a person, young or old, you may not think you have anybody, but you can stand on your own 2 feet.